I have a neurological disorder that gives me the uncontrollable desire to amputate my own limbs. Ask me anything. Hey Reddit. I have a neurological and psychological disorder that makes me feel the constant need to amputate or lose one of my body parts. Body integrity identity disorder, BID. For me, my BID gives me a constant, extremely powerful urge to hack off my left leg below the knee. I haven't yet, and I don't plan to. Sufferers' symptoms vary, and some have even gone as far as self-amputation. It's a strange condition, and I figured some people here may be interested in what it is like to have BID. So go ahead, ask me anything. How does the brain of someone with BID respond after having actually gone through with it? In no way am I suggesting you do it, but I'm curious if once your leg is gone, your brain will say, "Hey left arm, I don't like the look of you." In other words, do you think the urges would go away or just become refixated somewhere else? I've read some articles on it, and for people with specific urges they tend to go away once they amputate the limb. There was one story of a guy who was fixated on amputating his left leg below the knee. He did it, and said the urges totally went away. There was another guy who wanted to amputate both his legs and damage them with dry ice to the point where they had to be amputated. Then he got really depressed because he couldn't wheel his wheelchair onto the beach or feel the sand and water between his toes. This is the one question I really can't answer, because I've never amputated it. If anything ever happens, well, it'd be the most morbid AMA follow-up ever, haha. Are you in counseling or some other kind of treatment for this? If so, what is it like? If not, how do you cope on your own? When my symptoms started emerging, I was in treatment, mainly to identify my condition. There isn't any real form of treatment for it, mainly more therapy, which I can't afford, and don't see helping much. Does the urge get more intense when you're drunk? Kinda. It's a bit complicated, and has more to do with the context of the situation. For example, I try to avoid walking/stumbling home from a bar alone, because it does feel like I have a higher chance of acting on my impulses. It's the combination of having nothing else occupy my mind, allowing it to naturally focus on my leg, and feeling bolder from alcohol. There were a few times where I considered stick my leg out in front of a bus or passing car. I was wondering the same thing. What he finds himself in a state where his inhibitions are lowered, drunk, high, etc., and just says fuck it. I don't know if this is a joke, but I'd actually like to see the answer. I know with self-injury the urge gets more intense at certain levels of inebriation. Do you have the urge to remove anything else? How is this treatable, if at all? What is your favorite food? Reminds me of a story in The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat, where a guy thinks his leg is not his and wakes up in the middle of the night freaking out and stuff because someone put a leg in his bed. Do you have any similar things happen? Or do you feel that it is fully your own limb and you just want to amputate it? I do not know anything really about the disorder, so maybe my line of thinking is way off. It's just my leg that I want gone. I have heard it varies, though. It isn't really treatable, but therapy is an option. Tacos. That story you were mentioning is about a legitimate condition, but not mine. I forget the name, but it involves falsely attributing a limb's ownership. For me, I am aware that my leg is my own leg. The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat is about a man with visual agnosia. One form of visual agnosia is called prosopagnosia, also known as face blindness. This is when it is extremely difficult to differentiate between people's faces. I have it and it's a bitch. Oh wow. I think this is one of the most fascinating neurological disorders I've ever come across, if I'm honest. I was watching Casualty, UK TV show, about a year ago, and there was a storyline involving BID. I Wikipedia'd and was fascinated. How strong are the urges? Do you ever end up making detailed plans? How do you cope or prevent yourself from actually doing physical harm? When was your diagnosis? Did you have to learn to cope from a young age? Thanks. The urges range from aimless wandering, to coming close to doing it. I've never made detailed plans, as most of the time it seems impromptu and impulsive. For example, as I posted above, the closest I'd ever came to removing it was setting my leg across a train track. Don't know if this was already asked. Have you done the treatment where you put a mirror next to your right leg and then move it, therefore giving your brain the juxtaposition that even though you know it is your right leg, it is still seemingly your left leg? No, actually. That is interesting. I will try it out sometimes, and hopefully I won't have the desire to amputate both legs. I thought this treatment was for people who had already lost a limb and felt that their phantom limb was in a really uncomfortable position. The mirror tricks them into thinking the phantom limb isn't distorted, thereby relieving the pain. How do you propose it would work in this case? I'm a lifelong amputee. I had never heard of this disorder until I joined an amputee message board. This guy named George started sending me emails wanting to know all about being an amputee as a child, because when he was a child he dreamed of nothing more than having his leg amputated. He was in his 70s when he contacted me. A few years earlier, he took a shotgun and blasted his leg off. He expressed his pure joy at finally feeling complete. He spent a lot of time giving presentations to medical students and prosthetics professionals. Being an amputee had become his reason for living, and he was a very happy old man. Thank you for sharing that. Very interesting. Do you know what happens to those who self-amputate? What happens to their urges? Does your brain give you a particular reason why you should do it? I don't know anybody else who has it, so I couldn't tell you about what happens after they amputate. The most commonly accepted theory to why this happens is that there is some sort of neurological failure of the brain's inner body mapping function, paraphrased from Wikipedia. This part of the brain is located on the right side, and explains why most sufferers, including myself, have problems with limbs on the left side. Apparently the urge continues. I have heard of cases where people have literally been left with one limb thanks to the disorder. People also cut off other extremities, including their penis shutters. How were you diagnosed? At what point did you say to yourself, okay, I might have a problem? Thanks for doing an AMA. I answered some of this further up, but I will elaborate. My whole life I've always pretended having a limp or an injury in that leg, and as I got further along into my teens, I started to realize that I would frequently pretend that I had a limp. My "I think something is really wrong" moment was when I started fantasizing about crashing my car, causing injuries to that leg specifically. I had an extremely strong desire to cut my fingers off with scissors during a low to moderate acid trip. It's like you're aware that it would be very bad, but there's something about the resistance the blades give against your body that makes you long for the moment they finally overpower your flesh and cut through. It had to be me doing it though, someone else would still be horrific. I get a similar feeling standing at the edge of high objects. Is this similar for you? Just to chime in, I get the same thing about high places. As a kid I was on the playground once, standing on top of some monkey bars, and I had the sickening urge to jump through the gap in the bars even though I knew I would probably get caught at my head or hit my jaw. Somehow I just glanced my back going down, but I'll never forget that horrific need to do something I knew might kill me. I think it's an impulse control thing, as I've heard the sentiment before. I've wondered if I've had this lately. As a bit of a backstory, I've suffered from anxiety and depression for a number of years now. About a year ago I woke up with tingling hands and feet, and like an idiot, looked up these symptoms and came across a condition called Buerger's disease. Buerger's is an autoimmune response to cigarette smoke in the body, which leads to swollen veins and arteries and ultimately causes lack of blood flow and amputation from gangrene. Ever since then I've had pain in my right leg and constantly think about losing it. I'm terrified that I might lose it, but still think about it daily. All the doctors I've seen have told me it's probably from anxiety/stress since the blood flow and nerves are good. Did you ever have anything similar that led to a diagnosis? Is there any treatment for it? It sounds slightly different to BID, and I'd be hesitant to say that you have it. However, it varies a lot, and I'm no doctor. An extremely common co-symptom is depression, which I also suffer, but I've never had pain in the said limb. Also, it sounds like you think about losing a limb, but are afraid of it. I think the key factor in having bite is that the sufferer wants to lose it. Thank you for watching the video. If you're new, please be sure to subscribe, like and turn on post notifications so you never miss an upload. Post your own stories in the comments down below.